Something is changing inside Buckingham Palace. And it is happening so quietly, so carefully, with such precision, that most people are not even noticing it yet. But those who watch the royal family closely, the body language experts, the palace correspondents, the historians who study how power actually moves inside the crown, they are seeing it with unmistakable clarity. Prince William is quietly reshaping the role of Queen Camilla. And King Charles, the man who fought for decades to place her at his side, appears to be watching it all unfold without saying a word. This is not the kind of royal drama that makes headlines. There are no shouting matches in the hallways of Windsor Castle. No public confrontations. No emergency press conferences. This is something far more calculated. Far more British. It is the slow, deliberate, almost invisible reconfiguration of influence. And what makes it remarkable is that it is happening while Charles is still king, while he still wears the crown, while the man who promised to protect Camilla still holds the power to do so. Yet he remains silent. And that silence, to those who understand how the palace really works, is speaking volumes. Keep watching, because what is unfolding behind those carefully maintained palace walls will reveal something profound about how power actually transfers inside one of the world's most watched institutions. And it will force you to ask a question that has no easy answer. When does protecting the future require sacrificing the person you love most? To understand why this matters so deeply, you have to go back to the beginning. To a man who waited longer than almost any heir in British history to take the throne. To a woman who spent decades being cast as the villain in someone else's love story. To a love that endured public hatred, media cruelty, and an entire nation's grief directed at her face. Charles fought for Camilla when the entire world seemed to be against them both. He endured the criticism. He absorbed the hostility. He refused to surrender, refused to give in, refused to accept that their love was something that needed to be apologized for or hidden away. And when he finally became king, he did something extraordinary. He elevated her to a title that had never been used before. Not queen consort. Not the secondary title that protocol would have dictated. Simply Queen. Queen Camilla. It was his greatest personal victory. A declaration of love written into the constitutional fabric of the British monarchy. It was meant to be permanent. Meant to be final. Meant to be the answer to every battle they had fought. Every doubt they had endured. Every moment when it seemed like the institution would never accept her. After everything, he was saying to the world, here is proof that I chose her. And I chose her with the full authority of the crown. But now something has shifted. And the shift appears to be coming not from Charles, but from William. Royal commentators and palace watchers have begun noticing patterns in how Camilla is positioned at state occasions. Where she once stood prominently beside the king at the most high-profile moments, William and Catherine now increasingly occupy that central space in photographs and public events. Her charitable initiatives continue. Her media appearances happen. But observers note a subtle but meaningful change in how prominently they are positioned within the broader institutional narrative. Where once these efforts received significant palace amplification and support, the energy behind them now feels noticeably quieter. It is not dramatic. Nothing about it could be pointed to as a clear act of exclusion. But it is consistent. And consistency is what transforms isolated moments into patterns. Patterns are what palace insiders read as signals. Signals communicate intention. And the intention being communicated, according to those who watch this world closely, is that Camilla's footprint inside the institution is being deliberately and carefully reduced. For a woman who spent her entire adult life fighting simply to be accepted, this recalibration carries a particular kind of sting. She is not being removed. She is not being disrespected openly. But she may be experiencing something that is in some ways more difficult than open conflict. She may be experiencing a slow, methodical, very deliberate reduction of her prominence at the exact moment when everything she fought for should finally feel permanent and secure. But that is not all. Because understanding what William is doing requires understanding why he is doing it. And the answer to that question is far more complicated than simple personality conflict or generational tension. William has spent his entire adult life studying power, watching it, learning how it actually works inside institutions, observing what damages monarchies and what protects them, and he has arrived at conclusions that are shaping every strategic decision he is now quietly making. William believes that the monarchy's survival depends on how tightly focused its central narrative remains. He wants a leaner institution, a more focused one built around a compelling central story that the public can trust and connect with emotionally. He has lived through chaos. He watched the institution tear itself apart during the years when the royal family felt like a soap opera rather than a symbol of national identity. He lived through his mother's story. He watched it shake the foundations of the crown and then watched, painfully, as the institution slowly rebuilt itself. He has no intention of allowing that kind of complexity to define his reign before it even begins. And some royal analysts believe that within the vision William is constructing, a highly prominent and independently powerful Queen Camilla simply does not fit the carefully controlled narrative he is building. Not because of who she is as a person, but because of what her story represents. Because her history is complicated. Because her presence, no matter how gracefully she carries herself, inevitably invites questions about Diana. Because the wounds connected to her journey to the title of queen have never fully healed in the public consciousness. For William, thinking in terms of decades rather than years, managing that complexity now, while Charles is still king and the transition is still in its early stages, may feel not just reasonable but necessary. A form of protective surgery on the institution he loves above almost everything else. But this strategy, however institutionally sound it may be, carries profound human consequences. Because Charles is still alive, still reigning, still deeply, completely devoted to the woman he moved heaven and earth to place beside him. And the question that is now being asked quietly inside royal circles, in hushed conversations between palace officials and close observers, is this. If Charles is still king, why does it feel like someone else is already making the rules? The answer to that question begins with understanding King Charles himself. This is not a man who surrenders easily. His entire life has been a study in patience and persistence. He waited longer than any heir in British history to take the throne. He endured decades of public criticism, media hostility, and institutional resistance. He fought openly and unapologetically for Camilla when the entire world seemed united against her. Silence is not his natural position when something he loves is under pressure. And yet, the silence is there. Visible. Heavy. Present in every moment where Charles could have defended Camilla's position and chose not to. Some royal analysts believe the answer lies in Charles's health. His cancer diagnosis was not just a medical event. It was a psychological turning point. It forced him to confront his own mortality in a way that no king can truly prepare for. And when a man faces that kind of reckoning, his priorities shift in profound ways. Some reports from those close to the king suggest that Charles has become increasingly focused on legacy rather than on daily power. More concerned with what the monarchy will look like after him than with what it looks like right now. And if that is true, then perhaps his silence is not weakness. Perhaps it is something else entirely. Perhaps it is wisdom born from understanding something deeply and painfully. Charles understands that William is the future. He understands that the crown must evolve to survive. And he may have reached a quiet, private conclusion that allowing William to reshape certain dynamics now is the price of ensuring the institution endures, even if that reshaping touches the woman he loves most. But there is another layer to the silence that observers find equally compelling. Charles and William have always had a complicated relationship. There is love there, undeniably, but there is also tension. There is the permanent weight of Diana's memory, sitting between them like an uninvited guest at every family gathering. There is the difference in their personalities. Charles the intellectual romantic and William the controlled modernizer. And there is the simple, unavoidable reality that a king and his heir are always, on some level, in a quiet competition for relevance and authority. Some believe Charles's silence is not acceptance but strategy. That he is watching William carefully. That he is allowing certain moves to play out while reserving the right to correct course if things go too far. That behind the apparent stillness, there is a mind still very much engaged in the careful game of royal politics. What is undeniable is that Charles has not publicly pushed back. He has not defended Camilla's position in the sharp, declarative way he once would have. He has not made any statement that could be read as challenging William's reshaping of the palace's priorities. And that absence of defense is speaking to those who know how to listen. The palace reveals its truths not in what is said but in what is carefully, deliberately left unspoken. But that is not all. Because understanding Charles's silence requires looking at the specific, concrete ways that Camilla's footprint inside the institution is actually shrinking. The details matter. They tell the story of what is really happening behind closed doors. Keep watching, because the evidence of this shift is everywhere once you know where to look. Every great institution has invisible lines. Rules that are never written down, never formally announced, never explicitly agreed upon. But everyone inside the walls knows they are there. They feel them in the temperature of a room when someone steps too close to them. They read them in a subtle repositioning, a quiet word from the right person at the right moment, a look that lasts just slightly longer than is comfortable. The British monarchy has more of these invisible lines than almost any institution on earth. And according to several royal observers, Camilla has recently found herself standing very close to one she was not expecting to encounter. The line, as best as palace insiders can describe it, is about independence. About how much space Camilla occupies as a royal figure in her own right, separate from her role as Charles's wife. For a period after Charles became king, that space was expanding. Camilla was developing her own public identity. She was championing causes that mattered to her personally. She was giving interviews that felt warm and personal rather than formally dutiful. She was becoming someone the British public could connect with on her own terms, not just as the woman who stood beside the king. Her approval ratings were climbing. Her presence felt settled, earned. After everything she had endured, it seemed like she was finally becoming her own person inside the institution rather than simply being defined by her relationship to it. But some reports suggest that this growing independence has become a point of quiet concern for William. Not because he wishes Camilla harm, not because of personal animosity, but because he is thinking about architecture, about how the monarchy is structured and who holds what kind of symbolic authority within it. An increasingly independent queen with her own platform and her own public relationship with the world represents a variable that a future king needs to carefully manage. It introduces complexity into a narrative William is working very hard to keep controlled and focused. Observers have noted specific areas where Camilla's visibility has been quietly recalibrated. Her literary initiatives continue. Her media appearances happen. The causes she champions are still championed. But the institutional energy behind them has noticeably cooled. Where once these efforts received significant palace amplification and support, they now receive what might be called quiet tolerance rather than active promotion. The difference is subtle, but it is consistent. There is also the matter of state occasions. Those formal ceremonial moments that define the monarchy's relationship with history. In these settings, every detail is deliberate. Every positioning has been carefully considered. Who walks where? Who sits beside whom? Who is photographed in which configuration? These are not small decisions. They communicate hierarchy. They signal relevance. They tell the watching world who matters most. Some observers believe that in recent months, the choreography of these moments has begun to reflect a new set of priorities. Priorities that place William and Catherine more centrally in the visual story of the crown and position Camilla in a way that, while still respectful, feels slightly more peripheral than it once was. For Camilla, who spent so many years fighting simply to be accepted, this recalibration must carry a particular kind of sting. She is not being removed from her role. She is not being disrespected openly. But she may be experiencing something that is in some ways more difficult than open conflict. She may be experiencing a slow, careful, very deliberate reduction of her footprint inside the institution she worked so hard to belong to. Meetings that once included Camilla's team in key planning discussions are said to have become more selective. Communications that once flowed freely between different royal households are described as more guarded. These are subtle institutional signals. But to anyone who understands how the palace actually operates, they speak with perfect clarity. They suggest that boundaries are being redrawn, They suggest that not everyone is equally comfortable with where those new boundaries are falling. Those closest to Camilla are watching the situation with careful attention. She herself, by all accounts, is handling it with the same composed dignity she has cultivated over years of navigating impossible situations. She does not make scenes. She does not fight loudly. She learned long ago that survival inside the royal family requires patience, discretion, and an almost supernatural ability to absorb pressure without visibly breaking. And so she absorbs. She continues. She smiles at the right moments and says the right things and gives nothing away to the watching world. But those who know her well suggest that behind that composure, she understands exactly what is happening. She has lived inside royal politics long enough to read signals that most outsiders would miss entirely. And the signals she is reading right now are telling her something she never expected to have to face again. The ground beneath her feet is shifting. Ground she fought for decades to stand on. Ground that was supposed to be permanent once Charles became king. Ground that should have finally felt secure. William, for his part, maintains the appearance of warm family relations without difficulty. He is photographed alongside Charles and Camilla at appropriate moments. He speaks respectfully about the king in public settings. He does nothing that could be characterized as openly hostile or disrespectful toward his stepmother. He is far too disciplined for that. Far too aware of how damaging another visible royal family fracture would be to the institution he has dedicated himself to protecting. But discipline and warmth are not the same thing. And those who have watched William closely over the years understand something important. There is a difference between how he performs family unity and how he actually constructs the power structures around him. In performance, everything appears harmonious. In construction, the priorities are becoming increasingly clear. The tension that exists is not the tension of hatred or open contempt. It is something more nuanced, something in many ways more difficult to resolve. It is the tension of two different visions for what the monarchy should be. Two different understandings of who should hold influence and how much. Two different relationships with the legacy of the past and the demands of the future. William sees the monarchy as an institution that must be lean and focused to survive. He believes that every element of the public presentation matters enormously. Who is visible? Who is central? What story the institution is telling about itself? And he is systematically, carefully, almost invisibly reshaping those elements to match his vision. Camilla, by contrast, was beginning to believe that she had finally earned the right to simply exist inside this institution without needing to constantly prove her worth or manage perceptions. That after everything, after decades of fighting, she could finally relax into her role as queen and be accepted for who she is now, not defined entirely by who she was or what she cost. But institutions do not work that way. Institutions are never truly settled. They are always evolving, always responding to new pressures, always being subtly reshaped by those with the power to reshape them. And Camilla is learning, at a moment when she should be secure, that the position she occupies is far more fragile than she believed. But that is not all. Because what is happening with Camilla is only one part of a much larger story about how power transfers inside institutions and what that transfer costs the people caught inside it. Every great institution eventually arrives at a crossroads, a moment where the weight of its history and the demands of its future pull in opposite directions with equal force. The British monarchy has survived for centuries precisely because it has always found ways to navigate those moments. Sometimes gracefully, sometimes painfully, sometimes at enormous personal cost to the individuals caught inside the transition. But it has survived. Right now, the monarchy is at one of those crossroads again. And the story of William, Charles, and Camilla is not just a family drama playing out behind palace walls. It is a window into something much larger. It is a glimpse of how power actually transfers in one of the world's most watched institutions. And what happens next will shape the monarchy's identity for a generation. Keep watching, because what comes next reveals why this quiet reshaping matters so profoundly. The palace, as an institution, has always been extraordinarily good at managing appearances. The carefully pressed uniforms, the measured smiles, the practiced waves from palace balconies. the art of projecting unity and calm even when the reality behind closed doors is far more complicated. It is a skill passed down through generations, a survival mechanism built into the DNA of the crown itself. But even the most disciplined facade develops cracks over time. And right now, those who watch the palace most closely believe they can see the cracks beginning to form. Royal correspondents and palace insiders who speak carefully, always off the record, have begun painting a picture of an environment that is quietly but unmistakably tense. This is not the explosive, headline-grabbing tension of the Harry and Meghan years. This is different. This is the tension of people who are too experienced and too cautious to let their conflicts become public. This is the tension of a family navigating a transition that nobody has a clean script for. Because the truth is, no royal family in modern British history has faced quite this combination of circumstances at quite this moment. A king who is unwell, an heir who is increasingly assertive, a queen whose position was always more complicated than the official narrative suggested, and an institution acutely aware that the world is watching every signal it sends. That combination does not produce harmony. It produces pressure. And pressure, no matter how carefully managed, eventually finds a way to express itself. Some reports from palace observers suggest that the atmosphere in certain royal settings has shifted noticeably over the past year. Meetings that once included Camilla's team in key planning discussions are said to have become more selective. Communications that once flowed freely between different royal households are now described as more guarded. These are subtle institutional signals. But to anyone who understands how the palace actually operates, they speak with perfect clarity. Camilla is aware of these changes. Those close to her say she watches them with the careful attention of someone who has learned, through painful experience, to read the signs that others miss. She understands dynamics that most outsiders would not even recognize. She has lived inside royal politics long enough to know that the ground beneath anyone's feet can shift at any moment, regardless of title or position. And yet she continues. She performs her role. She shows up. She supports the king. She participates in the events and occasions required of her. She does what queens do. But everyone close to her knows that something has changed internally. That beneath the composed exterior, she is processing what it means to have fought for decades to reach a place that now feels less secure than she believed. The question that haunts the palace right now, the question that senior officials discuss carefully in private and never mention in public, is this. What happens when the transition from Charles's reign to William's begins in earnest? What happens when the tension that is currently being carefully managed explodes into something that cannot be contained behind closed palace doors? Some believe the tension will remain managed indefinitely, that William is too disciplined and Charles too aware of his legacy to allow their differences over Camilla's role to become visible fractures, that the palace machinery will continue absorbing the pressure and the public will never see the full picture of what is happening, that the facade will hold. But others are not so certain. They point to history. They note that the royal family has a long and consistent record of underestimating how much pressure can build behind closed doors before it finds a way out. They remember that nobody predicted the full force of what Harry and Meghan's departure would unleash. They remember that nobody anticipated how deeply Diana's story would shake the foundations of the crown. And they suggest that quiet tensions left unresolved and unaddressed have a way of becoming very loud indeed when the moment finally arrives. What is undeniable is that the monarchy is changing. The era of Charles and Camilla, whatever its ultimate historical judgment, is already beginning its transition toward something new. Something shaped by William's hand and William's vision. And in that new configuration, the question of where Camilla stands symbolically, institutionally, and personally remains genuinely unresolved. She fought her entire adult life to reach the place she now occupies. She endured public hatred. She absorbed media cruelty. She was cast as the villain in someone else's love story. She outlasted the criticism. She rebuilt her public image brick by careful brick. She stood beside Charles at his coronation and wore a crown that her enemies once swore she would never be allowed to touch. And now, at the moment when everything she fought for should finally feel permanent and secure, the ground is shifting again. Quietly, carefully, but unmistakably, the crown endures. It always has. But the people who wear it and the people who stand beside those who wear it are always, in the end, at its mercy and not the other way around. History will record what Charles built for Camilla. It will also record what William chose to do with it. And somewhere between those two chapters lies the real story of a monarchy navigating its most human and most complicated truth. Power is never truly shared. It is only ever borrowed. And the clock on every borrowed moment is always ticking. Do you think William is right to recalibrate Camilla's role for the sake of the institution's future? Or is he asking his stepmother to pay a price she should never have to pay? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If the story stayed with you, make sure you like this video and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. Click the video on your screen right now to watch the story that will help you understand even more about what is really happening inside the palace. You will not want to miss it.